Good evening and welcome to today's STAR session, which is going to be in the AMA format, a slight difference to how we do it. I'm just requesting everyone to just mute yourselves unless you have a question. Yeah, I think we are all set. We're all also live on LinkedIn live stream, Jyoti. So we have a lot of folks who actually join us from LinkedIn live as well. And so just a brief before we get started, folks, thanks for taking time to join us today to PM School's STAR session. PM School is probably one of the foremost and well-known names in the product management, I would say, upskilling domain. We've been around for close to 5 years now, since just before the pandemic, and we have an 8-week bootcamp program to help folks who are interested in getting into product management reach the level of knowledge, skill set to be able to ace product manager interviews and then back their dream product manager jobs. And as part of our commitment to help folks to upskill themselves in product management, we keep organizing a lot of STAR sessions, and today being one of them. We have Jyoti who's joined us. Jyoti, I believe you are in the Eastern time zone right now, joining in from the US, right? Okay,
that's
welcome.
Right. Thank you so much, Kushal. Very excited to be here.
Thank you. So just a couple of ground rules, folks. This is going to be an AMA, right? So we have a couple of I would say, curated questions we've had from audience who've been responding to this particular invite. So we can start with that, but please feel free to use the chat section to keep asking questions, dropping in your questions, and we'll keep picking them up and addressing them. I mean, Jyoti is going to pick them up, address them through the course of today's session. And yeah, with that, we can get started. Jyoti, if you could just start with a quick introduction, and then we can get the ball rolling on the AMA.
Thank you so much, PM School and Kushal, for first of all having this platform across for all the PMs. When I was typically entering this discipline of product management, we didn't have such channels. We learned only through experience. So thank you so much to the founders here of PM School. I think every time I see a platform here where there is connectivity across the globe, where the knowledge can be shared and learned across from experienced folks, I think I just get super excited about it. So thank you so much, PM School, for doing that. With that, I'll take a moment to get some intros around here. So I am Jyoti. I was born and raised in India, did my bachelor's and master's in computer science with a bachelor's in education. And I started off my career typically as a software developer with object-oriented programming. Those were the days. And then I continued on my journey of software development and then got into product at Microsoft Seattle Redmond head office, from where I realized I enjoyed talking to stakeholders. And I continued my journey there with small to medium startups as well as larger organizations. 5 years at Meta, out of which 1.5 years at Instagram. And recently, I, again, back in December, have joined GitHub, which is part of Microsoft, again, into the product space. So I enjoy talking to stakeholders, understanding their problems, and solving the problems out there across the globe, building products. So that's in a nutshell about me. And today our topic primarily is focused around communication and stakeholder management. So I think I would welcome questions out here, and I can definitely share anything that I have learned about this topic in my journey with some practical tips. Over to you, Kushal.
Thanks for that, Jyoti. So I'll start off. We have a few questions. As I mentioned, we had curated for some of our audience. I have one question which talks about, which asks, how do we coordinate with developers and developer teams, especially if you're a non-technical PM?
If I understand the question correctly, how do you coordinate with developer and developer teams if you're a non-technical PM?
Yes.
In my experience, primarily, there have been 3 things that have helped me. First of all, depending on what is what is your level of technical expertise in that product itself. So first, being aware So building awareness about, that's the first step that I would do. So as a PM, build your awareness about where you are in the technical tip. Whether you're a beginner, you are under the stack like an expert, or whether you are in the middle layer. Depending on that, what are the areas that you need to build that relationship with the developers on? So that's the second. Developer and developer teams are your stakeholders. To be able to identify why do you need to build that relationship is something that is common, that you need to be aware as a PM, and you need to make sure that you have that contract or understanding with that developer or the developer team. So for example, if I am a PM and I want to make sure there are the next 3 features on the product that this developer team is going to help me go to market, then I need to set up that relationship and build that rapport with them to be able to understand what I need to do on those 3 features, what is my role and what is their role. So the second aspect is, the first one was awareness. The second one is building that contract with that team or the developers, that, hey, this is what my role is going to be. This is what I'm expecting of you. And we need to partner on this. And what does success look like? And where do you need their help? So I think building that rapport is super important. And thirdly, is typically establishing that communication channel. So different developer teams, whether they are senior or whether they are freshers or whether they are in the middle ground, will have different modes of communication channels. So spend time, understand your audience on the developers. They are your customers who are going to build this for you, and see what is their preference. Some senior developers want to just, discuss the requirements and do not want everyday one-on-one meeting out there typically. Other junior developers prefer day on day. Hey, Jyoti, keep a tab on our regular work. But if you do that to senior developers, they're going to be pushed off. Like, hey, we understand what needs to be done. So third is understand your developer team out there and build that and be honest about it. If you are learning, if, for example, on a tech stack, I am a beginner, I'm just assuming, making up a case. And if you identify that, be honest about it and build that rapport with the developer. Identify resources. How much technical depth do you need? You don't have to go ahead and develop. You're not coding out there. That's why you're seeking their help. What is your role and how much of technology do you really need to understand? So try to build that rapport. And I think building those 3 different areas like awareness, rapport, and then establishing that model of communication and partnership to deliver success, which means taking your 3 features to the market, would be super helpful.
Sounds good. We have one more question. Are there any common best practices which we see product managers make, and how can we improve? How can we improve communication overall? Essentially, the question is like, how do we know that as a product manager we are being effective communicators? How do you measure it, and then how do we improve? I think that's a paraphrase question overall.
All right. I think it is definitely linked to establishing relationships. So communication and stakeholder management is all about building relations. And as far as you understand, for the audience here, which is technical as well as non-technical, our communication is about a message that we want to convey, but it is not just a one-sided communication. We also want to understand how that message is being interpreted across. So you see where, Kushal is trying to ask me a question and he's trying to rephrase it and use some words to make sure that I understand that question. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to interpret those words, and based on my conditioning and my experience and background, I'm trying to answer those with an assumption that you all here, or whoever is going to be listening to the recording, is going to understand. All this is communication typically. So communication is all in terms of the message that we are trying to communicate, how it is perceived, and then how you are retrieving it back in the simplest level. So things that have really helped, as a product manager in my career, I'll share it in 3 blocks. When I started off as a PM career, which means the early PM phase, at that point in time, I think establishing clear communication channels. I like to think of it like as an acronym, which I have formed for this session, which is clear face. We can, you all can note it down, or you all can, I think it really helps me. I generally jot it down on, when I was an early PM, I used to have sticky notes where I used to put it on my screen on my laptop and remind myself, because I needed to work on my communication. It's not that as soon as I started as an early PM, I knew everything of communication. I had to build it. And the first one, the C, stands for clear communication channels. So depending on your audience, who are your stakeholders, you identify that and establish clear communication channels. These could be one-on-one meetings, depending on the seniority of the stakeholders, the engagement model of that project. It could be typically your Slack messages or whatever messaging mechanism is there in your organization. It could be emails, and it could be also regular notes. So that's C of the clear face. L, when we get to the L of that, it's listen actively. It's not just about putting a message across and boom, your job is over as a PM. You'll get some comments, you'll get some feedback. You have to make sure that whatever you've communicated, people are understanding. So sometimes I put Slack messages, they'll say a thumbs up, yes, we got it. That does not mean nothing. They just saw a message and they read it. But hey, the timeline is changing, and there is a dependency on the market and the legal and privacy. Does that make sense? So I have to reiterate that message. Oh yeah, now I got their attention. So I think listen actively to what their responses are and try to take that accordingly. The E is embrace transparency. When you are transparent about your product development life cycle, where you are in the milestone, what are the timelines that are changing, what are the cross dependencies, that's super important. Adapt your messaging depending on a technical, non-technical, audience. If you're talking to developers, you need to be technical to understand their pain points so that you can help them overcome those pain points and get them to deliver the product that your customers need. But if you're talking the same technical lingo with a marketing team, you're going to face barriers because they don't understand that much of technical depth. That's not their job. So it's as simple as that. I'm assuming that this audience here today understands English and I'm using English as a medium. If I was talking to a non-English speaking audience, and if I'm talking English, there is a barrier that I'm creating. So try to reduce that barrier by understanding and adapting your messaging according to the audience that you're trying to target. And the final R of the clear is typically have regular updates. So depending on the product, semester planning or quarterly planning, whatever your organization is trying to do, over communicate rather than under communicate. Especially if you all are in hybrid and remote worlds, it's super important to over communicate and not assume that your audience knows this. And the last one is, this was clear. The face typically is, the F stands for, if anyone who's with me out here, F is for foresee concerns. So you can be proactive. When you're talking to so many different stakeholders, you are in a unique position where you can listen to the pain points of all the different product management partners, which are marketing, legal, privacy, developers, design. When you can see the concerns or the limitations, make sure that when you raise them accordingly and you can mitigate them. The A is typically you can address your conflict, which means that there will be conflict among different teams. Conflict is a part of regular product management cycles. Once you've understood that, hey, there are some conflicts that are coming in, try to go midway and find a common ground. C out of our face is typically to cultivate empathy. Each team will have its own priorities, its own needs to serve. For example, marketing really wants to get the features out the door because of XYZ reasons and their go-to-market plans. Engineering team have their own technical challenges. Maybe capacity is a constraint, their infra is limited, and they will have their own perspectives. Try to build that empathy as a product manager because you are central to all these teams, and then try to negotiate and navigate accordingly as a win-win for both the teams and overall keeping your customer obsession in your mind. And the final one is E of your clear face, if you all are with me, is to establish the feedback loop. So ensure that all your team members, including your customers, external and internal stakeholders, have a way to get back to you in terms of feedback of all your communication channels across your product development lifecycle, all the milestones. So have a clear face. I think that's my message to all of you when you're trying to establish relations, communication model, and stakeholders management out here.
Was quite a comprehensive, I would say, a response to the question, Jyoti. Thanks for sharing that. A few of them, in fact, are new to me as well. Although intuitively you figure out some of these things without a framework in place, but that is a good one. So we have one more question. This is a favorite, I would probably say. And the question is like, how do you handle critical feedback from stakeholders? Can you share a technique that has been particularly effective?
So first of all, thank you for the question. I think, how do you handle critical feedback? from stakeholders. So the very first factor is there is critical feedback, from the stakeholders. So it's important to establish that channel. If you lean on to the answer in the previous question, I've encouraged to establish those kind of channels where stakeholders can give you feedback, either one-on-one or either in a group or either async. You can have surveys typically. And to ensure that there is critical feedback, there have been multiple instances in my 15 plus years of product journey. I can share some of the examples where, hey, I thought when I was an early PM, I'm not at fault for missing the timelines, hey, because the developer did something or the developer went on PTO or took a day off, and because of that, we missed the deadline. Okay, all right. But as you mature as a PM, if you are handling customers which are external facing and you are ensuring that there is a release which the organization is having at least 50K grants tied to that, and there are GTMs, and there are so many other things tied to that, which is a public release which is tied to that. So imagine that there are multiple things that can go wrong, including timelines, including the requirements, including the positioning of that product in the market. Anything and everything, you have to wear that hat and think what has gone wrong. So it's important, first of all, I would again say there are two things here super critical. One is accept. When feedback is there, you have to wear the hat of acceptance. It could be critical, it could be positive, it could be constructive, it could be destructive, whatever that is. But as a PM, first of all, accept that feedback, let that channel come in. Second is typically build a critical detailed analysis of that one. When I say that, it's not about just going ahead and doing a deep dive fishbone analysis of, hey, what could have gone wrong and all of that. All those techniques are definitely helpful, but look at it from the perspective of the customer and the business. I think that's where we are getting our bread and butter. That's why we are in that role where we are, to solve the problem for the customers, and where we get our paychecks is typically the organization. We are working for both of these at the spearheaded. And then there are the teams with whom we are collaborating, communicating as stakeholders and establishing that. So think of it objectively versus subjectively. And then once we wear that hat of objective analysis, bring all your stakeholders together and think of ways of how you can continuously learn from this experience while you're building. Stakeholders could change. So there are three things if you see across in product development lifecycle. You have people, process, and technology. So if we break this down into a people problem, a process problem, or a technology problem, and then try to identify some fixes which you can experiment in the short term. I like to use the word experiment. So if there is critical feedback, there is acceptance, then you've put some mechanisms in place where you ensure that you're going to experiment if you're working with the same stakeholders so as to not repeat, and see if it can be improvised. And then measure again after a period of time. Give it a time bound. Everything is, in case of SMART goals, I would say T is super important. You say, hey, next time we won't repeat this, or we'll see that there will be a reduction in that criticism in some form. Get back to that stakeholder after making those changes and see if there has been a change. Many a times what we do, we receive the feedback, we accept it, we put some mechanisms in place, but we forget to close the loop. So last but not the least, try to close the loop with your stakeholders and assess if that made a difference. Whatever you and the team made those changes. It could be you made a change in the timelines, you made a change in the process, or you made a change in typically addressing the feedback from the customers in some form. Is it changing? Is it really helping? And do you want to continue the experiment with the stakeholders? So bring them together. I think I definitely want to encourage that we are all better together. It's not a isolated or a siloed environment where product managers can succeed. Sometimes it can be difficult to build a collaborative culture, but for a PM to succeed, building that collaboration is super successful. So invest time and energy in experimenting how to improvise on the critical feedback. And feedback is good. So better together, build awareness of the feedback and some mechanisms to address that, and close the loop. Do not forget to do that with your stakeholders.
Sounds good. Thanks for sharing that a detailed outline there. There is one question from Rahul. Yeah, I think the question is around how do you handle conflicts? Specifically, if multiple stakeholders are looking at multiple ways to approach a solution or to a problem or a particular feature, is there a way to resolve this? I'm just paraphrasing this after the question. Is there a way to resolve conflicts objectively? I think you did talk about it, but in situations where power of decision making lies across multiple people, how do we coordinate to get the product moving in the right direction or a feature?
Thank you for the question, Rahul. And thank you for the paraphrase, Kushal. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, here we are thinking about how do we align the different stakeholders to achieve common goals primarily. And as a PM, I
Correct.
think I got it. So as a PM, you are uniquely positioned, first of all, to identify what is that common goal and define that along with your team. Make sure that you are communicating that across, that all the stakeholders understand what is that common goal. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 6 months, quarterly, whatever planning you are doing, to ensure that your team understands the common goals that your product is going to achieve is typically on the shoulders of a PM. So definitely you can use multiple mechanisms to do that, but make sure you relay that information and bring everyone together on what success looks like. What are the metrics you are going to use typically for that phase? And like I mentioned, have constant communication channels opened across of how are you going to communicate. Once the planning phase has started, you've completed planning, you've aligned the stakeholders. And if there are any conflicts that are arising, as a PM, you need to bring them together. Just for the sake of our discussion, let's assume that there is a conflict between the timeline when the developers think that they can build certain set of features which can go to market, and you have a pressure as a PM from the go to market team mentioning that, hey, we want to align it with XYZ timeline because externally our competitors are also trying to bring this to the market. And we want to make sure that we, capture the majority of that during that time frame. Is this a conflict? Yes, it's a conflict of timing. So identifying and building that awareness of that, yes, hey, there are these two different stakeholders, there is a conflict of timing. Um, Try to double click on this. So if I were the PM, I would go ahead, set up 101 with the marketing team, try to understand what is their ask, what is the priority, what is at stake. And again, try to answer the question, which I find very helpful. So what? You don't have to necessarily upfront and bring it up with the marketing, but in the back of my mind, when I'm trying to talk to marketing, when they are telling me typically that, hey, this timeline has to be achieved, so what if it is not achieved? By double clicking on that, you'll try to understand their perspective deeper and get those answers. Likewise, do that with the developer team. They might say, hey, we need blah 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 features, blah 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 time, and we have a dependency. Okay, so what? you know and then try to double click and get to an understand their perspective. What is it for them? Now you are a common PM who understands both these teams, their pain points, their perspectives, and what is needed. Wear the hat of a PM, think about the customer. When do they need this? Why do they need this? What is the priority? Is it an urgent need? Does it need to ship to market immediately? Think from the customer's perspective, think from the company's perspective, from the unique positioning of the business. Get those insights and marry them all together and come up with a cohesive narrative in terms of the story, what you think would be a ground which will win one, the customer and the business. That's your highest priority. In the law of needs, when you say needs and wants, that's your highest one. And then you trickle it down to the developer and the marketing team, and then come to an understanding of what is the impact of change in timeline. Hey, customers really don't need it. It's a low price feature. Who cares? It's okay. Why are we discussing and wasting time on that conflict? But hey, it's a super important critical feature. Customers really need it. There is XYZ revenue at stake. We can get new customer segment from different geographies. Let's talk. Business is interested, or it might get impacted in terms of branding or revenue. What is the impact? Try to assess that. If it's a high price thing, yes, let's invest time in that. So I think as a PM, try to gather all that intel, do all the collaboration groundwork, and come to a middle ground of better together with all these stakeholders.
I think that answers your question as well, Amandeep. I think this is pretty comprehensive. Uh, okay, so we have one more question. What is the role of documentation as a PM? Or Probably trying to understand the motive behind the question. How important is documentation for product managers? I think that is where the question lies.
It's interesting. Thank you for asking the question. So, documentation, what is the importance of documentation? Documentation can mean a lot in terms of different stakeholders. When I was a new PM, documentation to me was writing PRDs or product requirement of specification, writing technical specifications, writing UAT test cases, writing unit test cases, integration test cases, like typically to the core throughout the PDLC, that was documentation. So, hey Jyoti, will you document the unit test cases? Yes. Hey Jyoti, can you document integration plans as well? Yes. All right, you do yes to everything as an early PM. But what I'm trying to understand the question, because it's coming from a PM. So which means that, hey, do we have our requirements or customer problems, pain points articulated clearly so that everyone can take a look at it in case it needs to be revisited or changed at a later state and time? So that's the starting entry point. Customer personas. Which users are you trying to solve the problems for? Do you have some form of understanding or clarity and documented somewhere in terms of pain points? Yes, so you definitely need that to be able to do that. Secondly, what kind of journeys are you trying to solve, for these customers? Is it like small to medium to enterprises? What kind of customer segments, what geographies? So I would say, in terms of who are your users, what are the pain points, what is your plan to address those pain points, in which geographies, why are you going there? Depending on that and what teams you have in the ecosystem. Sometimes your go-to-market plan documentation is done by your GTM teams, your go-to-market teams. So the product managers might not have to document that. But at the barest minimum, yes, in terms of what is the scope of your product requirements that you're trying to solve for. So your vision and strategy, that needs to come from your product managers. Overall, what's your vision for the product? What's the strategy? How are you going to get there in 1 to 3 years? And then break that down into smaller plans. And you can partner with multiple PMs. If you are a group PM, which means that you have multiple PMs working with you on the similar problem, all of them can contribute to that. And you make sure you send that across to all your different stakeholders in your communication. When I mentioned that have channels, and communication is about creating that message, sending it, and making sure that you receive feedback from the other end and they have established on that common ground. So that there are no isolated team members who are working to solve that problem, and you're all working towards that common goal. So I think it's important to document what you're working on in terms of vision, strategy, the requirements, how you are going to measure success. If you have data metrics associated with that, great. And what are the use cases you're working on and how you're going to get there typically. So product owns all of that. Technical specifications would again be the development and the engineering team, if you have dedicated engineers who can do that. How they document that is a separate question altogether, but of course they will continue to document the technical architecture, system designs, what are the changes based on the current infra and all of that. So you can lean into that. And finally, the last segment of documentation, you're still not out the door. So if you are getting your features out the door to external facing audience, what are the communication channels that are going to be there? So you partner with your marketing teams. Generally, marketing teams will own the documentation, but you can influence the messaging. What are the typical technical terms that need to get in there? So you will own that piece of documentation. You can review, you can give feedback. And this can vary again, depending on the size of the organization. If there are startups which are really lean, you wear the hat of everything out there. As you graduate and you get more employees into the team, then you can divide and conquer. And in larger organizations, you can continue to focus on the vision, strategy, and the roadmap of getting externally, with owning those documentation of creation, but reviewing the external marketing piece out there. Hope this is helpful.
Sounds good. We have a question from Arshivi. Arshivi, do you want to unmute yourself and pose the question directly?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, and in this discussion, briefly, it was mentioned. So when you're joining a new team, how do you understand each stakeholder teams, what their motivation or metric is, right? So you briefly mentioned the marketing teams one, right? So it could be generic, especially when you're joining a new team. perhaps it's generic, and then you try to understand it deeper. So how do you get there to build that rapport, to make sure that all stakeholders are aligned on the same goal of product?
Got it. Arshavi, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Please correct me
Yeah,
if not.
yeah,
All right.
that's correct.
So the question is typically when you're starting off with a new team, how do you understand these stakeholders and how do you ensure that they are all on the same page with similar metrics? Is that a fair understanding?
No, so like each team will have their own goals or metric to achieve, right? For example, you mentioned that marketing team wants to get the features out faster. Um, so they can put it out there, maybe like a new AI feature is releasing. So similar to that, what are the goals, of an engineering team or marketing team or other stakeholders? How do we understand that better?
Got it. So I think first of all, at a product level, it's up to the PM Arshvi and all the others here to make sure that your goal is not for the team individually. You are solving pain points for the customers. So your organization, XYZ organization, is trying to build a product and solve certain pain points for a specific customer persona. That is where you start with as a PM. And once you've understood that, for example, we are all on Zoom today, and Zoom, let's assume for the use case that, hey, we are all PMs in Zoom, and Zoom is building a certain set of features for a certain set of audience. Now we all understand we'll need to build our understanding what are our company goals for Zoom. So Zoom as an organization will have its own goals. It could be multiple different goals. There could be a North Star metric. Of course, eventually all businesses need revenue. So I'm assuming we are keeping our ARR or annual recurring revenue as our primary metric, a business metric. But in terms of customers, eventually we want to understand, do we want to increase our monthly engaged users? Do we want to increase our acquisition part of the funnel or awareness part of the funnel? Where are we in terms of the funnel? What do we want to do? Or do we want to enter a new geography, a new market? So company goals, it's important as a PM first to build that understanding that what is the company trying to strive for. So there will be a set of company goals which will come out as a PM of a specific area. Now there is no one PM of Zoom. There are multiple different product areas within Zoom, that will be there. And what area of that organization are you basically the product manager? What are you responsible for? So for example, let me pick up something, maybe chat, we are all on chat here, and maybe you are a PM of chat on Zoom, and you might have multiple other PMs out there. Now, how can you define goals based on the previous goals that have gone across? Where are you in terms of the market? Are you building a new chat feature? Are you trying to increase engagement of the existing users? Or are you trying to make sure that you're going to retain the customers to use chat? So chat as a product, based on where you are, you have to understand your current funnel, where you are with that product, what you're trying to solve for, and you will define the goal for the product. Individually, you will go to the slicing of the stakeholders, which means you'll go to the marketing, you'll go to development team, you'll go to the design team. They will have their own goals. All right. And they have to partner with you to be able to make this successful. Internally, they can have XYZ goals, but eventually they have to marry their goals to one of these goals, what you will be defining for your 1 to 3 years. And your focus would be to make sure that they understand what these goals are and they can internally define. So for example, let's think engineering for chat might have, how do we make sure that our response time for chat on a desktop version is minimal, or availability is 99.99939s. That's the highest availability. That could be a technical goal which they are achieving. And does it marry your product goal? You will have to figure out when you're depending on your planning cycle, whether that is a common goal that you both are partnering on, or that is. So your goals will be focused on the customer's business. The engineering goals will be focused on both supporting customer business as well as their infra goals internally. They want to make sure that the platform that they support is independent. But as a PM, you don't need to dig deeper into the technical goals. You can help them unblock those. But all of these teams, marketing, developers, design, research, will tie with your common goals, which are tied to your company goals to succeed. Is it making sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was quite insightful. to kind of continue with this, it's more like how do you, sometimes build that rapport that they understand that, because sometimes that, engineering team might just not have that vision that, oh, this is what we are working towards, or marketing team might have, like, I think similar to their uh, goal, their internal motivation might be stronger than what the business metric or the product metric is. So how do we build that rapport, especially when we join as a new team or something like that, is what I'm.
Sure. So I think it's important as a PM to build a rapport first, to establish relations with your stakeholders. Again, these are your internal stakeholders. So let's define stakeholders as internal or external. Internally, you might have, assuming a typical healthy product team will have research, design, engineering, marketing, and sales. Let's try to limit it at 5 for your, of course, there's business teams, but we can keep it on those for sales team. You have to establish who are your primary stakeholders, who are going to help you build the product, and who are your secondary stakeholders. I would encourage using a RASI chart where it's super helpful just for your reference. When I start on a new team, I have a simple Excel or a Google Sheet. I lay out all the stakeholders that I capture from my senior stakeholders. I could talk to VPs and I would say, hey, if who are my stakeholders, they will give me 2 or 3 names. I set up one-on-ones with them and try to understand their motivation of engaging in this product. What is their role? Are they the decision makers or not? So your RASI chart will be typically building like, all right, you spoke to the VP, he or she gave you 2 more names. What is their role in the organization and in the product? Are they going to be, would they like to be just informed? Would they be part of the core team or a surrounding team? So gather your core team members. Once you've identified your core team members, setting up, you can set up weekly or bi-weekly syncs. I generally start off with weekly to make sure everything is, everyone is glued to the whole thing. And then you can add your secondary stakeholders, the second tier, as optional. And always post your notes from the meeting that are coming across and discussions that are going across. And of course, between all of that, I meet one-on-one with each one of them before making sure that whom I'm going to mark as mandatory versus optional. So make sure your stakeholders understand their role. Repeat that again and again. If you see they are not attending those meetings, try to set them aside with one-on-one time to understand what's restricting their engagement. What do you expect from them? So I think expectation setting with your stakeholders is super important. At the same time, learn what they expect from you. If they are expecting a weekly note from you as a PM and you are doing that maybe once a month, maybe we want to change that, across. And like I mentioned, remember the clear face acronym? From there, we mentioned adapt your messaging. So adapt your messaging to the audience. Your developers, adapt it to the developer team, adapt it to your marketing teams, and then bring all of them together. Like I mentioned, we bring all these teams together to succeed. And if it's just you need to inform your stakeholder, they don't need to be part of the decision making. You can just include them in your messaging. So there are 3 ways, like I mentioned, if you remember to communicate, it's 101, it's your team meetings, it's your comms through emails and weekly posts, weekly or bi-weekly posts. Make sure it is very clear and you use transparency in terms of where you are. If you don't know something, you say, we don't know, we are trying to work on it. If you know something that it's going to get delayed, do not hide that information. Again, I'm not saying go and put it across for your senior VPs and CEOs that, hey, we are delaying this shipment. We are not going to, do it for XYZ reason. But if you think there is a potential, to go ahead and cover it up, great, you can keep it internal. But if you're going to miss a big ship, which is going to be shipped externally, you need to definitely get your core stakeholders together, make sure they understand that messaging and build that rapport. So transparency will help you build trust. I think one part of your question was, how do you build that rapport and trust? By being transparent with your stakeholders, giving them what they need and taking them along with you on the journey to succeed. You will build your trust with them. I hope that's
Yeah, thank you.
We have a few questions in the chat section. Yeah, we have a few questions, specifically around how do you say no to a stakeholder when we don't have developer bandwidth? slash requirements are coming from top stakeholders. I think you've already answered this, a few of them from some of the frameworks that you mentioned. But I think this is more of a prioritization problem, at least the one which talks about having limited bandwidth. Folks, I think Jagjit, since you posed this question to me directly, I'll probably take a stab at it and then hand it over to Jyoti, because it's something which I enjoy like giving an analogy about. So as product managers, you're always crunched with resources, and resources could include time, developer slash design slash product bandwidth, as well as yeah, like so how do you split your resources across new feature development, big bug fixing, tech debt, etc. So a lot of frameworks which are out, which active product managers practice today, including uh, I think if I'm not mistaken, the Kano approach is one of them, Kano model. But apart from that, it is at least what's worked for me is just what is the impact versus effort like model, like what's the highest impact items and like what's the effort is going to take, and you work with you have like obviously specific man days or man weeks or man months which you work with generally, and you figure out like what are the X number of items which you can actually pick in terms of impact. And impact could be across multiple metrics, revenue, customer satisfaction, even if you're, for example, if you're working on a fintech product, it could be like money saved as well, especially if you're looking at transactions which are failing, or use a bug which causes users to double transact, etc. So long story short, yeah, it totally depends on what the priorities look like for a particular team. And based on that, you like understand what the impact is, what the effort look like, and then work out a point system which helps you prioritize this. I think that's what's consistently worked for me across all orgs so far. But anything you'd like to add to that, Jyoti?
Yeah, I think that's well said and shared, Kushal. In terms of impact, definitely. The question was tailored towards more about senior stakeholders. So as a PM, I think we get into multiple situations that, yes, hey, the CEO is asking for XYZ, or the privacy head, there is a request that has come in from there, and you really need to take a look at it. So depending on one, you have to assess where the request is coming from. If it is coming from a legal head and a privacy head or a security head, that it's the highest security risk to the organization, you want to definitely double click on it. Like I was in a situation where if it's coming from, if we don't do this, then the organization will be at a risk, for example, for FTC regulations. And because of that, XYZ fine will have to be paid by the organization. Of course, hey, I need to take a look at that and make sure it needs to get done. My developers might have the bandwidth or not have the bandwidth. Maybe I need to, like Kushal mentioned, borrow resources from other team. Is that an option? Is there another team which can help me with that? So first of all, you have to assess that what is that request that is coming in? Is it really critical? If not, what is your impact framework? There are multiple frameworks available. You can understand the reach. Like the reach, RISE framework is your reach, impact, cost, and effort. You try to put a rough estimate around all those four things. And you can really understand whether if it's a legal one, you really have to do it because of that, whatever reason I mentioned. Then how can you best do it? What is the time frame by when you need to get it done? Legal and privacy security always comes with a time frame. Try to assess your time and try to assess what work you have in terms of prioritization, and see what can you move down the ladder if this has to move up the ladder. Instead of absorbing regularly, because that would be churn on your team, you want to make sure that you have a healthy bandwidth when you're planning. Like have a 20% empty frame in your buffer when you're planning for all these kind of asks that could come in from change in priorities. And last but not the least, encourage changes to come in, because you want to adapt. Customer needs will change, privacy needs will change, security needs will change. We'll never be 100% secure, never 100% compliant to privacy. And you want to make sure that your that posture of your product, you're always improving over a period of time. So give it one of the smart things to do is give your team that small buffer where you can absorb such changes at some point in time, so that they don't feel the pressure. and help them as a PM assess the importance and prioritization of that ask before taking it to planning, to execution, to out the door. And learn to say, do not hesitate to say no. I think that is part. PMs are not expected to say yes for everything, but it really depends on all these different lenses, how you are going to basically shape your answer, format your answer, and then discuss it with your leadership and come back like, hey, if you're going to be taking this, we really want to get this done and I don't have the resources, what do you want to deprioritize? And you can always deprioritize other aspects of your roadmap because of these reasons.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We have time for a few questions, one or two of them, folks. So this is probably not related to communication, but Shravya has asked, how do you gather information to improve features when you have no prior knowledge about the feature itself?
So this is yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, please go ahead.
So this is interesting, Shravya and everyone on the call, where we have to understand how do you improve features typically. So again, I would take a step back. As a PM, our role is not necessarily to improve features, but to solve customers' pain points. So when we are thinking about features and we want to improve them, there are two big funnels through which a PM can gather insights. One is feedback. So if it's an external facing product, it's a B2C or a B2B product, you have established channels for receiving customer feedback. You can assess all the pain points that the customers are having from that feedback channel. So for example, in my current organization, we have all of that's listed across in some repo where we can go through all that line by line. I can understand that as a PM. The second one is your support team. So your support team will, or as an organization, will receive a lot of, again, insights from sales who are on the ground. That's your funnel as well, where you can understand what's going on with the features. And that's your human teams, your ears. But technically, you can also build your listeners within the product throughout the PDLC on the features. So you will see that you have your metrics around a specific feature. Let's again assume Zoom and chat. You expect a 95% engagement on chat. What does that mean? You need to define that as a product. It might mean that we have maybe 1 million users on a monthly basis, and they continue to utilize chat at least 9 out of 10 times whenever they are in a meeting. I'm just making up some random goals as a product manager, and that's my goal. But we have to understand based on that goal, what is the current state and where do we want to be in what amount of time. So you can use data to assess all of that. And based on that, you will try to do experiments. So what I've done in my previous organization is that I partner with the data scientists and the engineers to run experiments. We make certain changes to the feature and roll it out to a specific audience. So for example, it could be the North American region and 10% audience. I'm rolling out some changes to the chat feature based on some data that we've received from the channels of support and feedback, as well as some user research. And if the experiment is run successfully for that 10% of audience in the 3 months, and I monitor the changes in those metrics, if we see that they are increasing over a period of time, we can increase from 10% to maybe 50% and then go live to 100% of the audience of these users, because it is showing that the experiment is successful. What if the experiment is not successful? We need to bring that back. Whatever changes we are experimenting, we put them back the ladder and then we go with the next experiment. So likewise, you'll have a list of experiments that you want to do to that specific feature based on data, and you want to roll it out according to the observations that you're measuring gradually over a period of time. And that's basically how you will identify and gather information. I would highly encourage lean on your data rather than instincts. Of course, instincts are important, but do your user research, do your data insights and experimentation to ensure that it is successful.
Sounds good. Jyoti, we have one final question which we will be able to pick before we end the call. I'm going to make it more specific to the topic for today. How do you balance client retention. Okay, slightly off topic, but how do you balance client retention and scope creep, especially when client is due its renewal soon, or a contract is due for renewal soon? So essentially, the idea is how do you manage balancing for new features or try to avoid scope creep with tight timelines.
This is a very interesting question. Thank you for sharing, whoever shared that question. And this is, as a PM, I've experienced it day in and day out, especially with small to mid-sized organizations where you're in direct touch with the customers and the sales team. And there are multiple renewals. So there was typically a situation where left and right features are coming in. I keep receiving emails from the sales partners mentioning that, hey, we have a RFP going on for a specific proposal. RFP is like your request for proposal, and we need XYZ feature as part of the product. We know that this version of your enterprise product does not have the feature. Can you just put it in your next roadmap so that we can go ahead and showcase this to the customers and win our clients? All right. Accept the situation, understand the trigger points, and do not disturb your immediate engineering team and say, hey, you have to absorb this immediately. Do not go to engineering. I think as a PM, do the vetting. That's where you can help your teams. So understand what exactly are your features. Again, so what, if you don't do it? Like I mentioned, that's my armor, which I use even today in everything. When somebody says, hey, do this, and what if I don't do this? I have to do something else. Maybe I have other things on my plate, how do you assess? So prioritize it. It's very important to build that skill. Even as seasoned, PMs, we continue to build our prioritization skills regularly. We keep getting our requests from multiple stakeholders. And when it comes from sales and business, I can understand it's direct hit on ARR. So hence the pressure is high. But nevertheless, do not give in immediately. Please pause, take some time to assess the impact, where it is in terms of customer and business, like I mentioned. Those are the two things that really get me objectively understanding where the impact is. Of course, there could be, I have been in situations where in smaller startups, hey, the CEO walks in your room and says, like, get this out the door by end of day tomorrow. I'm going for a conference next week and I need it. Do you need it in the product, or can you do something like a working prototype? A prototype may be taking you a few hours versus actually getting out a product out the door with that feature. So sometimes you need to build that negotiation question answer, like, double click on it as a PM, talk to the sales people, talk to the business stakeholders, ask them why they need it, what is the need, what if scenarios, and I'll give you another thing which has been working for me recently. And I generally put it here on my, I don't know if you can see the sticky note. What if we were to? So that's a question. When you're talking to your stakeholders, try to use it. Think of different scenarios as a PM. What if we were to try something else instead of just building the feature and doing it? What if we were to? And we is very important here because you are bringing your stakeholder here. So what if we were to address this? I think use that. And yeah, if it's coming with you and your senior stakeholders, you are not the core decision maker. Your senior stakeholders are going to be powerful out there. So if you're a PM, senior PM or a group PM, you have your VPs or directors or senior directors who are answerable for the complete line of products which the organization is delivering. Partner with them, see it from the company's perspective, build that decision and then implement it, depending on the complexity. If it's a simple feature, it's a no-brainer, it will take 2 extra days. Please don't even waste time thinking about it. Just go ahead and build it. Don't over-engineer or over-productize thoughts across that feature.
Sounds good. And with this, we'll end today's session, folks. Thanks for dropping in, spending your evening with us today. And for people who are like joining in from LinkedIn Live, thanks for joining as well. So thanks so much, Jyoti. I think this has been quite an insightful session on our platform so far. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of takeaways for folks who have joined today. And guys who've joined in, again, thanks for joining. If you have any further questions, please do reach out to us directly on the email which Priyal has sent out as part of the invite. We'll try to look the right folks from the PM School team who can address your queries. Or if Jyoti is okay, we can share the LinkedIn profile, you can reach out to Jyoti directly in case you have any specific questions around, uh, uh, project management career, career advancement. How do you like bag your specific roles in specific companies? Anything under the sun around product management. And
Thank you.
once again, yeah, it was a
Thank-
pleasure, Jyoti. Thanks for taking the time out to join us all the way from New York. Totally appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone, and wishing each one the best in your journey. It's a craft. We all are continuing to, grow in that journey. So continue to reach out, continue to collaborate, and wishing you all the success in your product management journey, and wishing PM School all the very best.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. Please do check out our live cohort program. We are starting the next cohort in just a couple of weeks. Reach out to Priyal and she'll help with all the details. Thanks again, Jyoti. Have a great rest of the day and
Thank
rest of
you.
the week as well.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.